Waiter.
We are ready to go, Dinesh bhai?
Just last 10 seconds. Yeah, we are ready now. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this conversation that we are having with Professor V R Shah. My name is Pratyush Shankar, and I am at SEDA at Navrachana University. So, just for your information, In Conversation is a series of Navrachana University where we call a guest and we hold a kind of an informal interview, more like a conversation on something of interest. Today's conversation with Professor V R Shah is titled Teaching Structures to Architects. Now, before I go on to introduce Professor V R Shah in a formal fashion, let me just give you a little informal introduction. Professor V R Shah is a great friend and also has been a colleague where I was teaching at SEP for a very long time, and he was also teaching there. And we have worked together on many teaching assignments and also on one or two small projects. A very inspiring teacher, a very innovative teacher. And the context of today's conversation is actually related to the fact that so many times, we everyone talks about studio teaching or design teaching in architecture school. So the professor who teaches studio or the practicing architects who teach studio are kind of glorified as almost like demigods quite often, as if they are the ones who make the most important difference in students' life. But an architecture school is not only about studio teaching, but it is a combination of many different domains that come together, including arts, humanities, and construction and structures. And we have many teachers who are engineers themselves or who are trained as engineers who come and teach us. And in this context, we wanted to bring about a conversation with Professor V R Shah, because he himself is a structural engineer, so from civil engineering background, but he has been teaching in architecture school at SEP for more than 3 decades, and he also is a practicing structural designer. That's what makes him unique, and he has done many innovation in how to go about teaching structures and construction, which is quite a tough subject to teach to architects. And I think he will talk more about it. So, welcome, Professor Vinod Shah. It's really an honor, and we are very grateful to have you here. We are equally grateful that you are taking a course at SEDA. So, thanks for coming today, and thanks for coming to SEDA. Now, just before I ask you some questions, so I'll be asking you some questions, and then we'll take the conversation forward. Just a quick introduction of Professor Vinod Shah. Professor Vinod Shah completed his graduation in 1976, and after that he joined consulting firm in India as a design engineer. After 6 years of experience, he started teaching at the School of Architecture of SEP University. This was in 1982, where he taught for 33 years. At present, he is a managing director of Vinod Shah Consulting Engineer, and his emphasis of practice is to be involved, and he really is involved at each stage of the project. For engineering projects, his area of specialization is water retaining structures. In the post-earthquake work at Gujarat, as well as in Kashmir, he was involved in reconstruction of school buildings and water tanks. We would hear more about it today, I'm pretty sure. He was in charge of the National Resource Institute for training of teachers for seismic aspects. Now, he has been really training a lot of teachers. He delivers lectures. He has delivered lectures as resource person for training of architects for seismic aspects in different colleges in India. He has offered workshops on structures and architecture for students of architecture in many schools of architecture in Gujarat and all over India. His present interest uh, is in seismic design of buildings, uh, seismic resistance of vernacular structure, teaching methodology for students of architecture and engineering. He has presented papers in various international conferences and workshops. So that's Professor V R Shah for you. We lovingly call him VR. Welcome, sir. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Pratyush, for my generous introduction. Yeah, and it is also good that you brought this. It is this whole subject of teaching technology is equally important, and it is becoming more and more relevant in today's time. Yeah, thank you. Let's go to our conversations.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks for this. Yeah, so I think that's what, because and this is a thing for us. This is a conversation that we have been having for quite some time about teaching structures in an architecture school. But then, as we were discussing, me and Professor V R Shah in the last few days, there's so many layers to this conversation, and it will be nice to kind of reveal that. So we are not only, frankly speaking, Professor V R Shah, we are not only interested to know how you teach structures, but we also want to understand you as a person. And I think for me, if you ask me, and I always like to understand where this person is coming from, what is his background, what is his or her training, what were the major influencing factors. So, and that formative years when you start a practice. My first question is actually related to that. I would love to know more about your journey as a person and as a professional, and I would really love to understand it better. Uh, how did you start? What all did you do to reach where you have reached today?
Yeah, uh, I think what you're saying is very, very true, because in our studies, when we study master builders or master architect or engineer, we ask them to study all this so that you know what are the influences and why did they come to a certain kind of a, you know, certain kind of a state, or maybe sometimes, even their solutions may also affect, the way they are brought up with the kind of things that they have gone through. Anyway, for me, I would say that uh, I'll start from my graduation. That after completing
Right.
my course in civil engineering from the institute, which is across the SEPT, which is LD College of Engineering, Gujarat University. Uh, I actually joined a firm of Vakil Mehta Sheth Consulting Engineers, Dr. Vakil, who was Dean of SEPT for so many years. So I started career with him. And after 4 years or so, I thought that I think I had enough of this. So I should go to somewhere else. And I decided, and I went to GIDC. And in the meantime, when I was working with one structural consultant, Yogesh Wani, who was coming to GIDC for the approval of his works, so he told me that Dr. Vakil wants that if you want to teach at School of Building Science and Technology, in 82, they had started this school. It was to start from the next semester. They said that if you want, you can contact Professor C.B. Shah. So actually, I went and met Professor C.B. Shah, and C.B. Shah said that if you want to teach even School of Architecture, we have this possibility. Professor Lavanya had gone out, who was a teacher of structures. So he told me that why don't you teach a structures course on design of concrete structure, because it is more relevant to what you're doing. I said, I think it is a very soft option. I can do this, not a problem. So I decided and I started teaching. And after some times, Brother Sibisha came with a suggestion that there is going to be a interview for the full-time post. If you are interested, why don't you apply and join School of Architecture? I had this dream of starting a consultancy firm, because when we were working in Dr. Vakil's office, we were three friends. We decided that after some time, like Dr. Vakil Mehta Sheth, we will have our own consulting firm. And we could see after 4 years that it is not that easy, that dreaming is fine. But I saw an opportunity if I joined School of Architecture, because at that time, Professor Lavingya, Professor Ajay Shah, Professor C.B. Shah, all were doing their own practice, along with the teaching. So I saw this opportunity that I can do this. So I said, okay, I'll appear for the interview. I got selected, and Professor Shibisha gave me an appointment letter. But then he asked me that you will have to right now say yes or no. I said that give me some time. Let me finish this semester, so you know how good I am. Even I'll know that whether I'm fit for teaching or not. Then Professor Shibisha, those who know him, he has only black and white. There's no gray. So he said that either you say yes or no. Forget about this. I also hesitated a little bit, and then I also said yes, I'm joining, and I joined. I left GIDC. I joined this, and I started teaching. I I I started teaching, and as I was teaching this first course, in those days it was design of concrete structure. I started teaching that, and on the day one, when I was entering the steps, some senior student was coming down, and he saw me, and he asked somebody, "Who is this fellow?" He said that he is going to be our structures professor. Then he went by me, and all of a sudden he raised his hand and said, "No structures." I said, "Oh my God, what a welcome." Now, what do you do with this? I went to the class. I was quite nervous. I started taking the class. I had prepared very well because I had done this design of concrete structure for 4 years. Should not be a problem in teaching this to the students who are second year or third year students. Not an issue at all. But then after 15, 20 minutes, my all material got exhausted. And I said, "Oh my God, what do I do now?" So I felt quite embarrassed, and I said, "Fine, this is a class for us. This is a first lecture, so take this as an introduction. Maybe we'll go into more detail next time." So I actually postponed the whole thing for a week. Then I did something, and I was just trying to find out that I was not comfortable. My students were not comfortable. And even I didn't know what I was teaching and why. The same thing which I had learned in engineering without asking a single question. These people are asking me too many questions that they are not interested at all in this. What is this scenario? Then I thought that maybe my problem is this language, English language. So I said that because I learned in LD College of Engineering where it was an English medium, but all my teachers used to say speak Gujarati, and we are doing that, and I was not good at English, so I thought that I should work on that. So then I went to the Xavier's Institute where they had this language laboratory and language classes. I attended these for 6 months language course, and I was proficient in English. I said, "Good, now I can face these people." I went there and tried, but no, English was not a problem. I think problem was somewhere else. Then I tried for some more time, and one day I decided that leave it. This is not a cup of tea for me. I'll leave. I'll go back to where I was. I went back to GIDC. And GIDC, I met the chief engineer. I said that I want to come back. Then he said, "Sorry, that post is no more vacant. V R Shah, whenever there is a vacancy, we'll give you a call." Oh my God! In those days, it was not easy as today. That to get the job. It is not that my family was from they had a business, and if I don't do even job, that was not a problem. But it was that I decided that no, I should do something. So I came back. I came back to school, and I was wondering that what is happening. Why this I'm not able to get across the students of architecture. Then what I did was I attended all structure or all history classes of Muktira Chauhan. I attended all history classes of Professor Chaya. I attended all environmental science classes of Sivisha. And then I got a book by Salvadori Ambrose, then I realized that teaching of structures to architect is completely different than what is the way it is taught to the engineers. Then slowly I got the grip, and I started teaching them. In the meantime, I also got, because in School of Architecture, we had senior professor, Professor Lavingya, who used to teach the earlier courses. Earlier courses were more interesting than the courses that I was teaching, because earlier courses had all qualitative aspect. And so I didn't get that opportunity. But fortunately, I got this opportunity in building science. And I started teaching fundamental structures to building science. And students were so happy. I realized for the first time that even building science students were also happy. That, yeah, there's somebody who's talking about, all this without any calculations, any numbers. They were very happy. So that is how my career started and of course, we will go further into this. But as far as your question is concerned here, at the same time, I was not doing any practice, because you can understand that I was going through all this, and it was not possible to do in practice. But after all this thing got settled, Leo Pereira, who is an architect, who approached me one day, and I was just sitting in the that office area, and he asked me that, would you like to take this assignment of structural design of one house that I'm doing in Bilimura? I said, yeah, I can. Then I said, but Bilimura is too far. How can we do structures there? He said, yeah, it is far, but it's not a problem. It is an overnight journey. You sit in a passenger train at 11 o'clock. You reach in the morning at 10 o'clock. You finish your work and again come back by the same train, overnight train. I said, fine. So I started working with Leo. And at the same time, I got, I almost is all the structures so far. Even today, I'm working with Leo. We have many of his houses, factory buildings, schools. We have worked with him, and uh, when we work with Leo, it is more of a not just professional work. It is professional and talking about academics and what is happening in the school and who is teaching what, etc., etc. Will happen. So this is, I think we'll talk about this little later, Pratyush, because I think I can finish everything what you want to ask in only one question. So let's go further. Yeah.
No, wonderful. I think it was. It's very interesting. I'm quite fascinated by your early years, if I may use that word. And also, I think I quite like the story because it gives hope and encouragement to all our young faculty members. And also the fact that they must have immense patience and a sense of humor to survive these early years of confusions, of acceptance and rejection. And
Yeah.
it's quite interesting, this whole ecosystem of practicing architects and academics. And I would like to talk more about practice in a while. But let me just continue this conversation about this guy who came on the ramp, the senior student,
Yes.
and he says no structures.
Yeah.
And this is it's in fact it's a very classic binary, almost a classic divide of
Hmm.
the engineer and the architect that comes to fore
Hmm.
in a studio or an architecture college, where the architecture college students sometimes feel that structure design faculty is going to kill my creativity. I'm also trying to provoke you, is going
Yeah.
to kill my creativity, and hence we have to be left free to do anything.
Hmm.
और ये अभी आके हमको कैलकुलेशन करा देगा, ये कर देगा, तो हमारा बिल्डिंग विल बी ऑर्डिनरी. So how did you, one is of course the teaching. I mean, I'm like, you attended history classes and other classes, but how did you, I know you have totally bridged that gap. In fact, it is a false binary. I totally believe it's a false binary, and understanding of structure can only enhance the design. But this is a very, sometimes a very kiddish binary or a kiddish construct that exists in architecture schools. Sometimes it even exists in faculty members. How did you bridge this? How did you transcend this? I would like to know more about it.
Yeah. Pratyush, this is very interesting actually. And even if you look at the literature,
Yeah.
that and we before this started, we were talking to Shantanu, that Mr. Ambrose,
Right.
rather I don't know whether he's doctorate or professor. Professor Ambrose, if you look at that period where that Salvadori's book, Ambrose book, Ambrose even structural design, if you look at it, they were trying to make the structured teaching interesting.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so you try and relate this with day-to-day object. You know, try and dramatize the whole thing. Exaggerate the deformations, do some model testing, do that, and make it interesting. But I think that Salvadori also in his life, he realized in the later part of it. Salvador is his 60s. His book was written in 60s, where
Right.
even Dr. Vakil had worked with him or had given lectures with him. So it was
Right.
very old. But at that time, the work has started because see that whole thing started with what? Whole thing started with the fact that this whole thing about master builder or master engineer or master architect, where these two things were together. That is,
Right.
their architecture and engineering, they were together. So, but when whole thing started, that somebody can conceive and somebody can construct. It is not necessary
Right.
that two agencies should be same. Then these things started. When they started in the teaching also, if you look at it, there were professors coming from engineering colleges and they were teaching the same way, the engineers are taught. But these
Right.
people, Salvadori, Ambrose, and Rosenthal, and other people in those days, they found that we need to create an interest into the students. But
Right.
that was not enough. If you go further, you will find that there was a time when there was people were talking about concepts, people were talking about systems, people were talking
Correct.
about architect and engineering together. And finally, the stage has come that they're talking about more of a even space. They're talking about the relationship of the architect and the engineer. So even what
Right.
happened for me also, that initially I started this. Initially I started this, making it interesting, making myself acceptable in teaching. So that happened. But then the later part was the conceptual understanding, system,
Right.
going to
Right.
the studios and contributing there. That came much later because what
Right.
you are saying is what people feel is also right. I tell many people that going to studio in talking about the design and particularly structural aspects is sometimes very dangerous
Right.
because what can happen is students in their design, they are at a stage, they are not finding the architectural solution, and if you suggest them, they will pick up their as solution and they will do it because that's easier. So, at what time you enter into the conversation with the students in the studio? And also, I used to always make sure that the faculty from architecture will also be there in the studio. That what I'm talking about, I'm talking about structure, I'm talking about structural system. But then the faculty member who is architecture can always, think of program and the spatial requirement and other thing, and he can always tell me that no, the system what you are suggesting is very efficient, but student is thinking of this. So this is very, very essential that in whether it is a conversation in the studio, whether it is teaching in the class, architect and engineer should teach this together so that whole thing about design
Right.
may not
Right.
get affected because sometimes we
Right.
as an engineer can give a solution. I'm there teaching
Yeah.
since many years, so I may not do that. I may tell them to do various things, but otherwise this is a danger.
Right, right. I mean, I think it's quite interesting what you have highlighted. One is about how architects like to relate to something they can feel, something they can sense, and something they can experience, and hence the teaching kind of also modified during your early years into something they can relate to. But also, I quite like the fact that you're also giving a kind of a, not a warning, but you'll have to watch out. You cannot simply, there is still no substitute to concepts. And at what stage a structure engineer should come to a studio and how it should come has to be a very delicate exercise. Otherwise, they can structure engineers can tend to give a solution, and the
Yes.
student will not explore the right solution
Hmm.
for the architectural form. So I think it's a
True.
very valid observation.
Yeah. Even structural engineer may shut down the solution that he is thinking on.
Right.
He may stop. Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
So just I will, if I may, just divert the conversation now. This was morely in the initial years, and I do remember, and this is a conversation you and me have been having for quite many days now. And during the 2000 earthquake, 2001 earthquake, January 26, Bhuj
Yes.
earthquake,
Yeah. Yeah.
and what happened after that was phenomenal in terms of the manner in which there was a total transformation of how construction structures and even studios are visualized at SEPT. And it was a very, very important moment institutionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Professor V R Shah, you played a huge role. You were in the middle of it. And I think it had an impact that's replication is we even see today. Yeah, it was not, and I think we took a conscious decision that we will not simply introduce a course on seismic resistance architecture, but we
Correct.
will see it as an opportunity to question the way we teach and what we teach. And
Yeah.
I would love to hear from you, because I see parallels with a natural kind of a disaster or whatever that is happening, a pandemic that is
Yeah.
happening today, which is making us question everything, right from urban planning to urban design of public places. And I'm
Correct.
just wondering, how does institute, uh, how should institute be responding to such massive events in the society? And it would
Yeah.
be wonderful if you could share some of your thoughts on what happened then 20
Hmm.
years back,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
are very much center of or part of the whole thing. And it will be lovely for others to know, because many of the people do not know this story.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'll tell you the whole thing in the form of stories only,
Correct.
and one can abstract from there.
Right.
The after 2 3 days of this, even it started on the day of the earthquake itself. That somebody came and told me that there is a 7+ magnitude of earthquake. I just fired that fellow. I said it cannot be. When it is 7+ earthquake, many buildings will fall. Many people will die. No. Then that fellow said that maybe that I'm wrong. I saw it on the TV, but I'm not sure. So then I went there and somebody told me that it is true. Some 18,000 plus people died. Some 200 plus buildings, fell into the Ahmedabad. Then I said, yeah, that means the knowledge of earthquake that I had was right. 7+ earthquake can make so much of a difference. So I was right. I was happy. And I was not doing anything for 2 days, and all of a sudden Professor Chaya called me that, what are you doing, VR? I said, nothing so far. I'm just waiting to do something. Then he said, why don't you come to our apartment? There are some, the damages into this, and people are worried about it. So can you come and just have a look at it? So I went with my friend, and we saw the entire building from top to bottom. And Rati, you won't realize we were so excited about this. The way the structure was behaving, we were going from first floor to second floor to terrace, and our expressions were like we were enjoying. In those, the people who were staying there, they said that we are talking about all this and these people are enjoying. Then Professor Chai had to explain that why they are enjoying. They can see the behavior of the structure, and they see the behavior as anticipated, and they are happy. Nothing else. Everything went. I said that For the timing, it is safe. Whenever you get the time, you get this thing retrofitted, not an issue. But then one lady suddenly came and asked me, she was working with CEE. She asked me that, but Professor Shah, how can you say it is safe? And that is, I said that I can not guarantee you, I can't certify this, but if I have to stay in this building, I would stay. Then Professor Shah is staying. So that's the
Yeah.
certificate if you want, not more than that. And then then school was open and we started working. And all of a sudden, one day, Professor Chaya told me that VR, can you give one lecture on seismic aspects and architectural considerations? I said, yeah, even I don't know about engineers. How do I talk about seismic aspects? And but I got some good books, and I because by that time I had seen few buildings and how do they behave. So that was the first lecture I gave on this, and then the whole thing started. The whole thing started that I don't know. It was just nothing was planned. Nobody was talking about. Everybody, I think, in the lawn, everybody was gathering and talking what to do, and everybody started working on its own. So in the process, we got this that municipal corporation wanted, because they had this problem. So many buildings have fallen and people were panicking. So they wanted, GICA had started doing some assessment work, and it was difficult. So there was some problem in their assessment. They were not able to certify it. So they wanted to give this work to SAP, and they assigned this work to SAP, and the RJ Shah, Professor RJ Shah, Professor Lavangia, then they started working on this. They started working on this, and in the uh, and it was a massive task taken for the first time. I would even say history. It was taken for the first time. So many buildings were assessed, and as you know, Professor RJ Shah is so systematic that everything was done. That photographs were taken, things were analyzed, and the certificates were given whether it is what grade of damage. So that was a big thing that the SEPT had done. And as you know, the people in the politics, they took this, and based on the damage, the people were given some compensation for this, and all these things happened. That was one stage. The second stage was teaching. Now this was going on one side, but studios cannot stop. So all faculty members came to this, that can we have a studio which is related to earthquake only, whether it is first year or whether it is final year. So everybody changed the whole studio program, and they started. So I was working with Professor Muktiraj Chauhan, Professor Rajan Raval, the Professor Snehal Nagarsheth, and as an engineer, I was there because I used to take this housing studio. So I was there even before the earthquake. I was there. So, but all the studios where it was, so I used to go and talk about, and different people, even Jaimini Mehta was also there. A lot of people, and they did this studio depending upon which studio they did it differently. Even we did our housing, and I can't talk about other studios, but our studio was so interesting that student had done a work. We went to Kalyanpur village, and we some 300 buildings had fallen. So we studied all that building. We did a major drawing of that. When we came back, and a student designed this seismic resistance housing, and I had this all, the students had documented all this, and I had an opportunity to present this paper in international conference. So it was so appreciated that how do you relate this disaster to what is happening in the teaching. It was an excellent example. I have documented it at my stage, I don't know about other studios. I'm sure that must have happened in other places also. But so that was as far as teaching is concerned, as far as this is concerned. Then you know that we got this opportunity to design this structure. You know, because
Right.
many schools had
Right.
fallen in the area of Kutch. So that PMO, I think Prime Minister's Relief Fund or something, we got some fund from there, and we started designing the structures. It was very interesting because we were within this. So we were trying to design our structures in such a way that they become seismic resistant, and everybody tried different configuration. Everybody tried. The material was more or less the same, and we designed the structures. Many. I think it was some 17, 18 schools, and almost all those who were connected with the SEPT,
Correct.
they worked into this.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I also designed certain schools. I remember all the faculty members were designing schools.
yeah,
We were doing damage assessment. So we were all part of the team going around in Gujarat doing damage assessment for. I remember traveling for 2 weeks just doing damage assessments in
yeah,
Saurashtra,
yeah.
and it was a very intense involvement of faculty members around that time.
Yes. And even for that matter, when the studio had not started, even
Right.
students were going on their own and
Correct.
trying to work something. I still remember that one student, Ranjit Wag, was designing some police housing or something. After on his own, he took a voluntary work. So a lot
Yeah.
of work was happening. You know, but this is as far as, and I have complete document which talks about what an institute can do, what
Exactly.
could be the
Correct.
contribution of an institute, starting from this disaster assessment to these studios to even I still remember that in all the committees everywhere our faculty members used to go, and certain decisions, government it was easy because they can always say that we had a person from SAP. So it becomes easy for them. So we were contributing to this at a very high level.
Right.
My personal level, this was actually real eye opener, because first time I realized myself that we were always looking at the structure as 2D. But when this whole thing is shaken, it is not just 2D, it is 3D. So you need to look at the structure in a 3D, which actually, uh, you know, fortunately, the architects were always looking at as a space and 3D. We were always cutting. That my office, Ashok is so comfortable that anything he can draw a plan and draw a section, and he can talk about 3D into that. So this is, we don't draw 3D sketches. We don't think 3D. But
Right.
that time we realized that it is high time that we should think of 3D.
Right.
Not only that, but I realized for the first time that structural engineering is not about only just calculations. It's not about confirming the sizes. It's not about just the calculation. It is much more than that. And that I first time realized that as a structural engineer we need to be philosopher also. I was wondering that where do we use this philosophy in our structure, and I realized for the first time that seismic resistant structures has a great philosophy, actually, which is underlined is that we are designing for the safety of the structure, safety of the people, and not the safety of the structure. So I said that, oh wow, we are using the philosophy also. And then we were talking about these buildings and other things, the whole question of economic came in. In one place, somebody said that if you are designing for seismic resistant structure, you'll be able to build 150 houses, but if you do without that, you can do 200 houses. Then, villagers were said, no, no, don't do that seismic resistance. So that economy came into the picture, this politics came into the picture. I said, structural engineer, we may take some decisions in the office, but it can connect to all of this. So
Correct.
that was a real revelation for me, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a very interesting perspective about how institutes can actually play a very proactive role. And in fact, this is also a classic case where the practice was looking towards the institute or an
Mm,
university to show the direction. The notion that has become now is
mm,
that the university is producing people to serve for practice, to serve
yeah,
in the industry. Whereas the university is also a place that shows direction for the practice for tomorrow. And I think it's a good to share notes, to, especially in today's time. Now, talking about practice VR, I think I would be very curious to now if I were to change tracks again. A lot has been said about institutes and academics and teaching, but
mm,
remember that VR is also a practicing architect. Some of the projects are pretty enviable. I mean, you are presently the structural designer for Nalanda University, that Doshi, you know, Dr. B.V. Doshi is doing. Many other projects that you are doing. Tell us something about the kind of practice you have, the kind of projects you do. I do remember you take interest. Well, he was the structure engineer for designer for my studio, and we had hours and hours of discussion. I remember, and my studio is like little. It's like really small. But tell us more about your practice, VR.
yeah. Mm, actually, in a way, as I said that I started my practice in 84 or 86.
Right.
After joining the school, I had that 2 years, 3 years of period. Then I started, and I started, the first project was with Leo Pereira, and I started. And I had, because of this, my colleagues, who were architects. So I worked with Leo Pereira, I worked with Professor Chaya also. We were designing this Kartikeya Sarabhai's house. So that was also a very interesting story. Then we had other people. Even I work with Surya Kakani. I work with Rameshwar also. So all these people I was working with, and I'll say that those were projects where there were single buildings, but I got this opportunity while working this project on Nalanda University. uh, I think the story goes like this, that Rajiv Katpalia, who was the main architect for this project, he called me one day. And I was going back from school to home, and he called me that he said that we are participating in such a competition where it is a zero energy project. And if you know something about CACB block or rammed earth or some such materials, we would like you to work on this project. I said, fine, let's meet. We met. I saw the soil report, and I said that one of my student postgraduate course had done a research on rammed earth, and the rice husk ash and fly ash, if you add as additives, how the properties will change, etc., etc. I said we can do this project. Then he said that, okay, give us the conceptual drawings of this, we can put into the this. And we submitted everything. They got the project. One day, I got the news. So I called Rajiv, and he said that congratulations to you also. I called Mr. Doshi, and he said that congratulations. He asked me a question that, do we teach this kind of thing in our schools? Uh, Doshi has this, he can provoke you. So I said that yes, in a way, actually, what I use in this competition was from my student study. So either way, yes, we teach, but not exactly the kind of depth that we are going to have in this project is there. And then we started working on that. In the meantime, we had one more project with them, which is a Smruti one, which is a memorial. Uh, so these, I'll talk about these two projects. The kind of challenges that we had, is that in Nalanda University, apart from that, as I said that earlier, I was working and it was only one building or two buildings. Here, they were almost 21 buildings, 1.25 lakh square meter of the construction, 700 plus crore rupees of the cost of the project. And obviously, when it starts, the finishing, is to be done early. So the timeline, I think, if I'm not wrong, 2.5 years or so. So this was really big for our office. And Pratyush has seen our office, a very small office, BPO kind of a office. It is a very
Yeah.
small office. And we had this task. But I'm thankful to all the engineers who worked, sometimes day and night, continuously for days together. We worked on this, and we were able to complete. We have almost completed 90%, 95%, some 5%
Great.
left. But challenging thing was that we wanted to use this compressed earth block there. So
Right.
there we consulted a consultant, Dr. Jagdish from Bangalore, and he helped us to find the right proportions. And we consulted somebody in Ahmedabad who can do this experimental work. So we got a truck full of load here, and then we did that actual casting of the block and testing of the block. Not
Right.
only that after that, we had done all tests which are required as per Indian standard codes of practice. Not only that, but that proof checking agency from IIT entered into this, Dr. Desai, and he said this is fine. But what will happen if there is a temperature of 50 degrees in the Bihar and there is a rain? What will happen to a CSEB block? I said, you show us how to do this, we'll test it. No, he said that you work out some test. Okay, we went to Nirma and we worked out, we worked out an apparatus in which we'll be putting this block under the water, which is having 50 degrees Celsius temperature. It will be compressed in such a way that it has the kind of stress it will have in the actual. It's a simulation, actually. It's a
Correct.
simulation that we had done. And then we had during the day, the temperature will be high. During the night, the temperature will go to the ambient temperature. And then we tested those blocks. So that was actually, in a way, for us, it was in a way challenging. And the part which, a lot of, the other engineers were involved along with me. The other thing was we wanted to do a different kind of a cladding. It was not a dry cladding or it was not a wet cladding, but it was a cladding with CSEB block. So we wanted to make sure, we wanted to check the efficacy of this in earthquake prone areas. So we constructed the scale down, structure. We got this thing tested there, and it was found that it was tested on a shake table.
Right.
The members from university, Dr. Desai, everybody was present, and we did this testing.
Interesting.
So it was a good experience, actually.
Yeah.
But in other projects also where we are doing this, we are using a rammed earth, and we are using this what you call country tile roof. So all these are experiments that people have already done 3.5 meter, 4 meter. We are testing this up to 6 meters,
Wow.
and we have used rammed earth as a structural wall.
Okay.
It is not just infill or just for the the fancy of it. So that also we went to the whole process. We went to Dr. Jagdish, we got this thing tested, all this. So these new materials that we are talking about, we as an engineer, we need to all this thing. And
Right.
sometimes I personally also feel that why engineers are not interested in trying something different, and architects, they take the lead. Then I realize that at the end of the day, it is that they are responsible for the safety and stability of the structures.
Correct.
So sometimes they are
Yeah.
not proactive into this. Yes.
True. Very, very true. I mean, it's quite fascinating that you have large scale projects and small scale projects, but I think something which is very inspiring is that the spirit of innovation and experimentation is there everywhere. So this is truly a practice of a professor, I can make out. And I think Professor V R, we would love to have a presentation of this, maybe just Nalanda University. And we would love to see slides someday, maybe,
Yeah.
after a few months or something. Uh,
Yeah, I think these all the structures that I talked about, this innovation and everything. But interesting part that you talked about is that presentation. Presentation will talk about my office and Rajiv. This
right,
conversation on working out the system continuously. Even in your project also, you had
correct,
come out with some sketch, you wanted something. Then
right.
we worked on this and we came out with, that frame with switch, that fleece sections and other things.
Teams and
So
other things, yeah.
that's a process that we follow in all our projects. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think it was wonderful working with you because I remember hours and hours of discussion on small things. It almost became like a structure class for us when me and Pragya would will visit your office in Ahmedabad. Uh, Professor, we are coming towards the end of the session,
Yeah.
and I had this kind of a question which is not necessarily related to your teaching or your work, but this is a question which is a more general question about the profession. Since you have seen almost 4 decades, more than 3 decades of architectural production, construction. I remember there was this time in the 60s when this was almost like an explosion of structural engineers, or structural engineers for Doshi, for Korea, for Kanvinde, and there was a range of experimentation that was happening in concrete around that time. Especially, I'm referring to works of Mahendra Raj.
Yes.
A lot of time has passed from that time, from the Hindustan Lever building and the pavilions at Pragati Maidan. Where do you see this whole gamut of structural design headed now? Do you see some shift? Do you see some change? If 60s was a time of nation building and kind of a obsession with concrete, or concrete as a thing that will lead to bigger structures, important symbols. Um, from a structural engineer point of view, I mean, we have seen some lot of airports and other structures that have come up in last 10, 15 years. Where is it headed? Some indications, something interesting to look forward to, something to watch out. Also, one thing that I've noticed is the prototyping has become very fast. Visualization has become very easy because of softwares and all those tools that are available. Where do you think, just kind of a speculation on the future? If we can end with that kind of a note, it will be very interesting. Your insight.
No, actually, Pratyush, if you know this, in your the studio also we tried this steel and this roofing material.
Correct.
You know, that actually, if you look at it for coming few years, I don't think that we have a better option, than the concrete. What is happening is that many places, many people are trying, and as I said that with the architects initiative, they are trying materials like, ramda, they're trying CACB block, they are trying, even for that matter, the structures in even burnt clay, masonry, and minimum of concrete. But what is happening with these all structures is that majority of this thing is happening in the area where the earthquake zones are low,
Right.
say zone 2, where this can be done. But
Right.
otherwise, if you look at these other parts, you will not find those kinds of buildings,
Correct.
because this that our present codes are very stringent on that.
Right.
They consider this as a very brittle material, and they are what we call response reduction factor. Response reduction factor is that we are actually not designing for the full force, we are designing 1/10 of that actual earthquake force.
Right.
So what happens is that if you have such a structure, they will put a penalty on that. So if
Right.
I say in numbers, If you're designing a frame structure, your response reduction factor is 5. So you divide your actual force by 5 and design. But if it is a brick building, you design that for a R of 2.5. So you are almost designing for double the force. One. Two is your building itself is because of masonry and thickness and all other things, is already heavy. It is already heavy. You're designing for heavy earthquake force, and you need to make it ductile. So you put all these corner bars and lintels and this and that. So ultimately, we have designed this load bearing structures in Nalanda, but it is really a tough task. So that is one thing. The second thing is people are trying the materials like bamboo. At many places people have and that also again the lead is by the architect. The structural engineer sometimes help them in confirming what they're doing, but lead is by them. But there also, you see, I attended one webinar. My students also studied something in the assignment as a part of assignment. The problem of, rather, the major aspect of this is that the cost and the life of such buildings.
Right.
So they cannot compete right now. They cannot compete with other material. I'm
Right.
sure. And the way we are heading, for the time being, at least I see no other solution. And if you compare, I'm sure you must have compared this in your own house, in your old studio also. If you compare the concrete and steel also, the steel will be more expensive than the concrete.
Right.
So what happens is that cost will also not allow to explore this possibility, because when I'm working with Rajiv, he all the time he tells me that can we do something in the steel.
Right.
So then, because certain kind of a quality control is exercised into that,
Right.
but I said that you compare the cost, you compare even I don't know what you're saying with airports and other structure. I'm sure they have the ways of making sure there's certain kind of a quality is assured. But for normal projects, not many people know what is a good welding or how to do a proper welding.
Right.
Then it becomes difficult for engineers to predict the behavior of such structures and the strength of such structures.
Interesting. Interesting. Uh, it's been wonderful. V R Shah, wonderful session. And I think I was just taking notes of the range of things that we have covered. It's like we can go on, but there's a limit to the
No,
session.
actually, Pratyush,
Ah,
if you don't mind, I'll take 2-3 minutes.
yes.
That the major title, that the teaching of structures to architect,
Correct.
we went through this, but I didn't talk about that. Is that
Yeah.
actually over a period of time we have developed a method of teaching these structures where we teach them in such a way that earlier years we talk about qualitative aspect, we talked about conceptual aspect, we talk more about intuitive aspects, and then later years we take up these and reinforce with the calculation. We have limited, we have cut down a lot onto the calculations, but
Right.
I feel personally that these people feel that making the model and testing the model is the only way to teach structures to the architects. I actually don't agree with that. Making, understanding behavior is fine, but unless you abstract a principle, for what you're doing,
Right.
take that principle and work in an abstract way, the scales are going to change. So
Correct.
abstraction of that and working at that level in an analytical mode is equally important. you know that I recently, few days back only, one student asked me that if I have a triangulation and if the angle changes, it becomes flatter and flatter, will forces change into that or not? And that was an opportunity to take the mathematics and show them that how the forces will change into this. So
Right.
I feel that this is a kind of a reaction against what was there. There were a lot of calculations. that
Right.
we were teaching almost, we had a diluted version of what is taught to the engineers. But they
Yeah.
were, oh, calculations were there. So that is fine. We remove many calculations, but there are minimum, the analysis, minimum calculations are required, which will reinforce the, this understanding. Either it is behavioral understanding, the qualitative aspects of this, it is very, very essential. And that actually we
I think thanks for pointing this out, because we were coming to the conclusion of the interview, and
right.
the main thing came towards the end. Good, you remembered what the title of the interview was. But I think it's wonderful how you're talking about how intuitive and experiential learning in the early years, but
Hmm.
backed down by some calculation, because you do need to have an abstract understanding for application. And I quite like the way you have kind of panned it out. Obviously, it's somebody will have to observe you teach and see how you teach to really understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think this conversation is only wanting us to have more such talks with you. Wish we could invite you over a cup of tea to Navrachana University to interact with all our faculty members. Hopefully, it will happen in a few months from now.
Sure.
So they will also meet you. But thanks for agreeing, Professor VR. Thanks for coming by. I
No.
think a wonderful conversation. I think this conversation is not only useful for students, but I think very, very useful for us practitioners and us architects both. For practitioners, how the spirit of experimentation and innovation is so important. And I think some very, very useful lessons for young academics, young teachers, or anyone who is teaching in schools of architecture. So really, really wanted to thank from Navrachana University and SEDA on behalf of all my colleagues for finding time. Uh, really, really, really grateful we are.
No, no, no. It is my pleasure, because
Yeah,
all this thing I'm sure you must have heard many times, because I keep on talking these stories,
correct.
because that I think because of the sept, that this, if you talk about the influences that I have,
Right,
is mainly from the sept. I
right,
learned this, that
right.
stories tells you more rather than talking about, more into
Absolutely,
the
absolutely.
abstract terms. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, V R Shah.
No.
Thanks a lot for coming over.
Yeah.
And and what we were also so it's been a wonderful event today of a wonderful conversation with Professor V R Shah. What we have also noticed today is that how this kind of the way he has managed to share his ideas, share his journey, etc. And for those of you who are following Navrachana University lectures and lecture series, just wanted to tell you that we would be having every Wednesday from now on, we would be having a lecture. So at least for the next 2 or 3 months, every Wednesday 5 p.m. is almost a spot that we have fixed. From next week onwards, we will be starting a lecture series that was cut short earlier because of the COVID situation, which is called Fresh from the Oven. This lecture series is of young practitioners in India who are doing a lot of innovation. And so do join us next Wednesday, 5 p.m. You will get the links to the YouTube. And next Wednesday, we are meeting Anand Sonecha of C Labs Practice in Ahmedabad. And I would like to thanks my colleague for supporting this. Thanks everyone at Navrachana University, and also thanks to Dinesh Bhai, who is not here in the room right now, for arranging this session. Hope you have a nice evening. Thanks for coming over. Thank you and bye bye.